What he knew and that I didn't was that establishing a line of this magnitude on El Cap is so much more work than climbing. It's so much more hardship and toiling and fear and stress and failure than it is success. And if you can't thrive in that kind of environment, naturally, there's a very good chance it's just not going to work out. You're going to just be like, what am I doing with my life? I'm going to go sport climbing in Spain in the summer. I'm going to go do something else. But what I loved about highball bouldering was that it was a process. When I walked up to Ambrosia for the first time, I was 2 years away from the day that I would actually do it. It took 2 years of preparation, of becoming better, of gaining confidence, of all of these things. And I loved that process. And what the Dawn Wall presented was another opportunity to go through that process. It was on a whole new scale, of course, but the process felt very familiar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Powers, and I want to thank you for joining me on the Fort Podcast today. This show is an open-ended discussion and journey covering real estate, business, entrepreneurship, and investing. I would love to hear from you by tweeting me at Fort Worth Chris on Twitter. And if you've enjoyed this show, I would be super grateful if you would subscribe on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you're listening on. And if on Apple, if you would leave a rating and review, it would mean a lot. And last but not least, you can check out all these episodes on YouTube. Hey guys, it's Chris. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Fort. I am pumped to have Kevin Jorgeson with me today, who's an American professional rock climber. He and his partner, Tommy Caldwell, are known for climbing the Dawn Wall of El Capitan in Yosemite, which is also the hardest free climb that we know here on Earth. We have an incredible conversation about the experience, 6 years of training and 19 days of living on the wall. We talk about his latest venture in building a rock climbing gym. We talk about the nonprofit he has that aims to impact 1 million kids and bring them to climbing, and a lot more. This is one of my favorite episodes, and I hope you enjoy. Kevin, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I've been excited leading up to this. Let's just start with a little bit about kind of your story growing up and kind of what has brought you to today.
Well, most people know me as a climber. So when people ask when I started climbing, my common answer is that I just never stopped. I don't really have a memory of life without climbing being in it. My parents tell stories of me climbing trees and cupboards and fences and anything I could get my hands and feet on. I didn't find the sport of climbing until I was 11, but it's really just been a defining passion of my life that I feel really fortunate to have found early on.
Was there like a climbing gym that kind of got you more active, or were you literally just like kind of born with the gene of just finding something to scale and kind of climb?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it was inevitable that I was going to be a climber of some kind, but there was a local climbing gym in town that I went to the grand opening of when I was 11. And surprisingly, it wasn't like a love at first sight, clearly this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life kind of thing. It was a little bit of a slow burn. But by about age 13, it was pretty much all I wanted to do. I stopped any other sports I was doing at the time and started focusing purely on climbing.
Was there a moment that you knew you were good at it? Did that happen between 11, 13? Like at what point did somebody say, hey, you're kind of a prodigy at this. You should do this more?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like kids progress into the sport much faster these days than how I experienced it. I really had to work for my skills. There's certainly some innate talent and intuition there, but there's so much sharpening that has to happen when you're getting into anything, but especially a sport like climbing. So I remember getting on the youth team and luckily having really great mentors, really great coaches that helped sharpen those skills. And it wasn't until I started competing in the youth circuit, first couple of years, very unimpressive results. But by about age 16, I started to win more and more, regionals and divisionals and soon nationals. And I was going to World Cups, youth World Cups over in Europe. And that's when it was clear that, this could be more than just a hobby.
Yeah. Is there anything, I want to talk about the different types of climbing, but before that, is there anything kind of unique to you physically or to most professional climbers that makes them climbers that maybe you had an advantage just because of the way you're built?
I mean, climbing is certainly like a strength to weight ratio based sport. And I think I just got lucky with a body type that kind of fits that mold. I couldn't play a high impact team sport, that's for sure. I just get tossed around. But I got the right build for something more like running or cycling or climbing than anything else. So, but other than that, no. I mean, that's one of the cool things about the sport is that it's really accessible to like lots of different body types, men and women, kids, adults of all ages.
Okay, so now let's just talk about what are the different types of climbing. And then I know you were big into bouldering, and then Kevin Dahlstrom gave me the word highballing that I had to ask you about. But what are the different types of climbing and what did you do?
Sure. So there's climbing without ropes and there's climbing with ropes. And, not all forms of climbing without ropes are deadly. So there's free soloing, which has the potential to be deadly for sure, above a certain height. But then there's bouldering, which typically tops out around, 20 feet or so. And it's climbing without ropes. You have, small 3 to 4 inch, we call them crash pads that you put on the ground. And there's famous bouldering destinations around the world. Some of them are in South Africa or Japan or France. And the US has its own Joshua Tree, Waco Tanks, Bishop, California. There's lots of these places that for climbers, it's just like, we flip through guidebooks. We plan our entire year around going at the right weather window to these destinations to go bouldering. And then on the rope side of things, you can sport climb, which is climb, 200-foot cliffs with a rope, and you're clipping in the bolts as you go. And then there's more traditional climbing, which is typically big, tall, multi-thousand-foot walls where you're putting gear in, but also taking it out as you go. So it's a little bit more of like a leave no trace approach to the sport. A lot more adventure, a lot more opportunities for getting benighted, and lots of other kind of curveballs thrown your way. But yeah, there's so many different flavors of the sport that, again, it just gives so many different entry points for people to experience it. Some people only boulder. Some people only climb big walls. Some people only sport climb. Some people, well, not many people only free solo that I know of. Even for Alex, it's like a very small percentage of his overall climbing in any given year, but it's the one that certainly captures the most attention.
Okay, and so your kind of expertise to begin with is bouldering, correct?
Yeah. So after I won a couple youth nationals, I was kind of wondering what to do next with my climbing, because you basically age out of competitions in the youth circuit at 19. And I had won nationals at 18, and I was just kind of ready to do a new thing. So I focused my climbing on bouldering outdoors. And that soon became a passion for what Dahlstrom was mentioning, which is this kind of sub-discipline of highball bouldering, which kind of rides the line between bouldering and soloing. It's just like it sounds. It's like really, really tall boulders, sometimes 40, 50, 60-foot tall boulders, where if you fall off the top, it's not going to be without consequence, like you enjoy with most bouldering. When you're 6 or 10 or 12 feet off the ground, you fall all the time and nothing happens. With highball bouldering, it's a dance of ambition and risk and aesthetics and preparation. And it's a dance that I loved, and one that I focused my career on for probably 5 or 6 years. And it's really what gave me a toehold into even making this a career at all.
And when you're competing, is it a race to the top, or how do you win? What's the way you're judged for a win?
No, it's a great question. So it's pretty similar to the format that climbing will enjoy in its first Olympics here in about a month. So there's, for competitions, 3 different disciplines. There's speed, like you say, for time, and it's a standardized route. all around the world. It's the same route, so people can train on it. And you show up and you go as fast as you can. Then there's the lead discipline, which is like 100-foot overhanging wall. And route setters, there's people whose only job is to create the paths that people climb up these walls. They set one really hard route, and whoever gets the highest or to the top wins. And there's a couple rounds that whittle it down from qualifications to finals. And then there's a round of bouldering. So you get those three to compete in. And for the upcoming Olympics, what's unique is that the athletes have to compete in all three, which is kind of like asking a marathoner to become an expert sprinter as well as being an expert hurdler. They're really very different disciplines that athletes usually they specialize in just one. But for this first format for the Olympics, there's only one medal for the entire sport. So the athletes have had to get trained up on all three. It should be pretty interesting to watch.
How come 2022 is the first year they're doing it? And do you have any involvement in this year's Olympics? Maybe not as an athlete, but as an advisor or somebody that's close to the sport?
No, I'll just be participating as a fan. Megan Martin is a fellow professional climber. She's going to be
commentator for NBC for the Olympics. And she's been refining her craft over the last couple of years with the national circuits and some international ones and just doing an amazing job. So I think it was an obvious choice and she's going to do a great job.
How many people, how many climbers will represent America? Do you know?
2 men and 2 women.
Cool. I love it. All right, let's move into something that I think a lot of listeners are anxious to hear about. I know I certainly am before we get into your business ventures, and that is the Dawn Wall. So I think I wanted to start by, you were a boulderer, which is climbing kind of not as high. And then a gentleman by the name of Tommy Caldwell kind of put out to the world that he wanted to climb the hardest route that kind of we know as humans on Earth. And you came out of the woodworks and said, I'd love to do that with you. So how did that, were you just, sitting on a couch one day and you're like, oh, I'll do that? Or did you think about it for a while before reaching out to him? Or how did that all kind of come to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are an unlikely partnership, both on paper and in personality, but when put together, turned out to be just the perfect mix for this project, I think. So what happened was I had just completed my proudest bouldering first ascent to date. It was a really tall, really dangerous climb in the Eastern Sierra. And sitting on top of that boulder, I had the very distinct realization or awareness that I had pushed that discipline of the sport as far as I was willing to push it. So not only did I need a new project, I needed a whole new discipline of the sport to immerse myself into. It was like a whole new chapter that I was looking for. A couple months later, I saw a short film of Tommy's early attempts on, really, we all just called it Tommy's Crazy Project on El Cap. It didn't have a name. It wasn't the Dawn Wall. It was just this crazy thing that Tommy was trying. He'd already been trying it for a couple of years and given up a couple times, and really he was just throwing it out to the next generation. And I'll never forget kind of the closing scene. He's in El Cap Meadow, beautiful sunset looking up at El Cap, and he's just like, I don't know what it would take to free climb this thing, but if these kids that are doing stuff on the boulders and the sport climbs, if they could apply that kind of talent to the big walls, that's what it would take to do this. He's like, I don't even know if I'll be the one that does this. And if not, I just want to plant the seed, for the next generation to come inspire us all or something along those lines. And if you've ever been called out before, it's exactly how it felt. What's funny though, is I think I might've been the only one that took it so directly or to heart, but I did feel that way. I was like, wow, Tommy is, such a pioneer in this sport. And if he's saying that this is the future, I believe him. So we had never climbed together. We knew of each other, but we had never climbed together. I didn't have his phone number. I didn't have his email. I'm pretty sure I sent him a Facebook message out of the blue after thinking about it for probably a month, just being like, hey, this is a bit of a long shot, but if any chance you need, a partner on this El Cap thing, I'd love to learn. I was like, I'm never going to hear back. And I didn't for a long time. I think probably because Tommy was hoping that someone more qualified would reach out. But when it became clear that I was the only one raising my hand, as he likes to tell it, he was like, well, got nothing to lose. At a minimum, I'll have a partner to help, hike heavy loads and belay me on my project for a season before he goes back to bouldering. He really didn't have any expectations, and neither did I, to be honest. Like, we didn't know what we were getting into. And I think there's something to that when it comes to really big projects. This element of not knowing what you're getting into at the beginning. We didn't know it was going to consume the next 6 years of our lives, and had I known that, I don't know how I would have reacted to that proposition. All I knew is that the guiding light of my climbing is doing things that had never been done before. So in many ways, this was a new canvas, but a similar art form, and this idea of just putting up an iconic first ascent on El Cap, that's like, that opportunity doesn't come around very often. So it was a reinvention of sorts that was required. We can get into it, but the early years were tough, to put to say the least.
There's a couple quick questions before we get into those early years. The first one is, you said you climbed that boulder route in this, I think, was it the Sahara, or your final route where you said you were sitting at the top?
Mm-hmm. In the Eastern Sierra, outside of Bishop, California, just south of Mammoth.
Got it. And you said that as you were sitting there, you kind of had that feeling that you had kind of done everything in that specialty that you could do. Is that because that was the hardest climb in the world and you had done it, or was it just a feeling that I've done everything I can do in this sport? It's time to move on to the next challenge.
Yeah, no, great question. So with highball bouldering, it is the craft of taking something that at the beginning is objectively risky, right? Like super high consequence with a high likelihood of failure. And there's a bunch of emotions of fear and stress wrapped up in an objective like that. But the art is bringing it down to your level through preparation, to the point that when you start climbing, you enter this flow state, and there is no fear of climbing or of falling. It's just pure execution. So with this particular climb, it's one of my proudest first ascents for sure. It wasn't the hardest climb in the world, but it was one of the hardest climbs of that height, I think, that had been done at the time. And what drew me to highballing for so many years was that flow state that you have to get into in order to be safe, essentially. Walking up to Ambrosia on day one of ever seeing it, like, it would have been reckless to try to climb it that day without a rope. But a couple years later, after rehearsing it a bunch with a rope and making sure that no holds were going to break and that my fitness was, above and beyond where I needed it to be, I was ready. And I went and executed. But I didn't get that flow state that I was looking for. Like, there was this out of body awareness of the danger that I was in. And I lost a little bit of control over that focus. And I started to tremble a little bit. And that's just like the worst case scenario. People often think that climbers are in it for the adrenaline. Well, I was up there on the last moves getting some adrenaline, and that's because something was going wrong. That's the last thing you want when you're climbing, is an adrenaline rush. It's actually quite tranquil most of the time. So what I learned sitting on top of that boulder is that I'd simply found my limit, my personal limit for this kind of risk, this kind of highball bouldering. I'd found an objective that personified as far as I was willing to push it. Harder and taller, well, maybe not taller, but definitely harder highballs have been done since then. This was way back in 2009. But at the time, it was kind of like, when people saw photos, it's just such a beautiful line. It's just like, whoa, it's just like, it's very arresting when you see it. So And I felt the same way the first time I saw the Dawn Wall. I looked up and I was like, whoa, and that's the kind of thing that I look for when deciding what to commit to. Because I've learned that about myself. Like when I commit to something, I'm going to do it. And not rushing into a new project after Ambrosia in Bishop was really important, and I probably took 6 months all told between finishing Ambrosia and really like signing up with Tommy to like try this El Cap project. But I knew it was where I wanted to take my climbing just because of how it stirred me deep down. There's so much curiosity, and I knew it was going to be such a path of growth and reinvention. Like I was so far away from being the climber that I needed to be to do this thing. But I knew that by just starting, even if I didn't get there, I was going to get so much better. I was going to learn so much. And knowing that early on, going into it, I think was a helpful perspective to have.
All right, my last question before we start the Dawn Wall. You said like in those last few parts of that climb, you started getting adrenaline. Was that just a mental thing? Was it weather? Did something happen that kind of triggered you? Or was it, just something that just came out of nowhere?
It totally caught me by surprise. I don't know what happened. It was not environmental. Conditions were perfect. It was 9 a.m. It gets the first light. It was January 9th. I remember it like it was yesterday. The rock texture was perfect. It was perfectly warmed up. But something about, just actually being up there for the first time without a rope, I just couldn't shake that very clear acknowledgement, right? Because, I practiced this thing relentlessly just because it was so hard. I wanted to do it, 5 times back to back with a rope on, when I was tired, just knowing that there was nothing that was going to make me fall on this thing. I knew the moves backwards and forwards. But the first time is still the first time of being up there without a rope on. And it just like, and it just totally caught me off guard. And I was like, okay, that's it. And I think the reason it caught me off guard is that it does ride that line between highball bouldering, which is essentially like tall enough that you're not going to die if you fall, but you're not going to walk away either, and soloing, where the outcome is like pretty clear. And I'm not a free soloist, that's like a totally different mindset. But if you fell off the top of Ambrosia, like there's a rock down there that you could hit that could certainly kill you, depending like what orientation you came off on. And so I think it was just like, oh, okay, I'm like riding this line between highball bouldering and free soloing. And by continuing, like, where does that path go? And basically the answer was it goes to free soloing. And that's just like, that wasn't my trajectory, So it seemed like a good time to switch gears.
Oh my gosh. I'm getting butterflies just thinking of
my fingers are sweating just for counting.
Mine are too. Yeah, because when you're up there and you start feeling that, there's nobody that can really, or maybe there is somebody that can come save you, or you're just kind of, you have to get it done.
There's only one way to safety, and it's up. And you there's no ambiguity about that when you're in the situation. And it feels terrible, to be honest. Like that's not, you want to be in that flow state, just executing. You don't want to be observing where you are and listening to any kind of commentary that your mind is having. Like, what are you doing up here? It's like, oh, did you put your foot on that foothold right, or this or that? And so, yeah, I think I just had to listen to that and internalize it, as much as I loved that discipline, and just recognize that, I'd taken it as far as I was going to, and it was time for something new.
All right. So you send Tommy a Facebook message and he reaches back out. What was your first kind of day on the job with him? I think we talked about naivety is sometimes our best strength. And once we know what we're in, we might not do it again, but you showed up fresh eyed. What was the first day like?
So funny. So we meet in El Cap Meadow. I've got like a like a spotting scope because I'm trying to figure out where the line is on the wall. El Cap is just so big. And I knew it was kind of to the right of this and to the left of that. But part of what makes the Dawn Wall so improbable is that it's so blank. It's not obvious where to go. So we meet in the meadow and he starts to point out the line. It goes here and then it goes over there, I think. And then I actually don't know about this part yet. We're going to have to figure that out. And then, so we kind of get a general idea. I'm like, okay, now I can see it. Now they pointed it out. I thought our first day together would be climbing, right? Obviously, we're just going to walk to the base and start climbing. Tommy had other plans. He let it slip several years after the fact. I think we were at a speaking gig together that he was so skeptical that I was going to be able to hang that his goal was to just break my spirit on the first day, just get it over with. so I could throw in the towel and he could find a real partner, So his test was to put a 100-pound haul bag on my back full of food and water and supplies and rope and gear. He had one as well. And so did I don't know how old his dad was at the time, late 60s maybe. And the tactic that you apply to a project like this actually is not to just walk to the base and start going up, but rather to hike around the back up to the top and drop in and kind of use gravity to your advantage and string rope along the line that you're trying to work, which basically gives you a way to commute around on the wall so that you can practice and figure out if this thing is even possible. Because that's really the question we were trying to answer early on. Does this even go? So I'd never hiked to the top of El Cap before. I didn't know how long that would take normally, let alone with a 100-pound pack. But I'll tell you what, it's it's not what I call type 1 fun.
Yeah.
It's pure suffering in the moment, made worse by the fact that Tommy's dad kept crop dusting me for the entire hike. And I just wanted to puke my guts out the whole time. And I'd hear this little giggle, and he was like, oh no. It was awful. So, 5 hours later, we started hiking in the afternoon. It was super hot, just drenching sweat. By the time we got to the top, the sun had long gone down. Beautiful, beautiful night sky. And I remember dropping this haul bag off my back and feeling totally weightless for the first time in 5 hours and stretching my arms above my head and just saying, yeah, that felt good. Which is kind of a counterintuitive thing to say after getting crop dusted for 5 hours and schlepping 100 pounds of gear to the top of El Cap. But it was true. There was something about it was probably the joy of the pain stopping. But I think there's something to pushing through hardship in the moment and enjoying the success of it. When it's over, you almost appreciate the memory of the experience more than the experience itself, And Tommy recalls that in that moment, he is like, that's not the reaction I was expecting. Maybe he does have what it takes, because what he knew and that I didn't was that establishing a line of this magnitude on El Cap is so much more work than climbing. It's so much more hardship and toiling and fear and stress and failure than it is success. And if you can't thrive in that kind of environment, naturally, there's a very good chance it's just not going to work out. You're going to just be like, what am I doing with my life? I'm going to go sport climbing in Spain in the summer. I'm going to go do something else. But what I loved about highball bouldering was that it was a process. When I walked up to Ambrosia for the first time, I was 2 years away from the day that I would actually do it. It took 2 years of preparation, of becoming better, of gaining confidence, of all of these things. And I loved that process. And what the Dawn Wall presented was another opportunity to go through that process. It was on a whole new scale, of course, but the process felt very familiar. So off we went. The next morning, Tommy's, next test was to tie a rope around a tree. I think it was a 200-meter rope, throw it over the edge and say, this is where the last pitch, and a pitch in rock climbing is just a rope length. This is where the last pitch of the Dawn Wall tops out, but it's all dirty. Why don't you swing down there, clean out the crack, and figure out if we need to add any bolts and blank sections or anything like that. So I clip my belay device into the rope and I slowly start walking backwards toward the edge of El Cap. And I don't know if you've ever stood at the, on the roof of a tall skyscraper or anything like that, but lowering your butt over the edge of a 3,000-foot cliff for the first time is a special kind of pucker factor. I was just like, oh my God, it's so much air. It's so much exposure. Your brain, the first time you do it, it almost can't even compute what it's seeing. The trees down there look like heads of broccoli. You can't even make out one from another. They just seem so far away. It just seems like it's such an impossible distance between you and the ground that it just doesn't make sense. But in some ways, what it does, the effect of that is that it puts you in a bubble of relevance that's really only 15 feet around you. What's going on right around you? And so I started, rappelling down and cleaning out the crack. And, soon enough, I found myself doing these huge pendulums to the left and to the right, trying to get to different crack systems to figure out where this pitch was going to go. Meanwhile, Tommy, peers his head over the top of El Cap, also clipped into a different rope, expecting to see me kind of cowering or cuddled in the corner, scrubbing moss out of a crack. And instead he sees me taking these huge pendulum swings, back and forth, trying to get over to some random crack. And he just starts laughing to himself. And that was kind of like the second data point where he's like, okay, maybe, just maybe, he's green as a gourd, but he can suffer and he can handle the exposure. I can teach him the rest. Rope logistics, big wall life, all that stuff can be taught, but the innate ability to endure hardship and kind of just the mindset that you bring to a certain environment, I think are things that they can be refined, but a lot of that stuff I think is also innate.
And at that point, had he told you kind of what he wanted in a partner? Did you know your role in that? Or did you just know that I'm going to help Tommy climb? Or was the goal always y'all are both going to complete this route and do it together?
Where we started and where we ended up as partners are two very different places. The reason Tommy started working on the Dawn Wall was as a distraction from heartbreak, a recent divorce. And so for him, his relationship to this climb was very different than the one I was coming into with. And I think he was probably just looking for anybody that could help facilitate, his relationship with this thing that was going to keep his mind off of this heartbreak more than anything. And for me, I saw this as a clear opportunity to kind of reinvent myself as a climber. And I couldn't think of a better mentor than someone like Tommy. So early on, it was very much a pupil mentor type relationship. And it was one that remained that way, I would say, close to the end. It really didn't feel like, and it wasn't until maybe even that final season that I had even a long shot of being able to keep up with Tommy on this last push. But there were a number of steps along the way. If for the longest time I just felt like a step parent to this project. It didn't feel like it was truly quote unquote mine or ours, but rather his, and I'm here to support him kind of thing. But that too, through various, setbacks and injuries and different things, like that relationship too started to change over the years. And all of that was, I think, necessary in order to get into the mindset that I personally needed to be in to have a chance at this thing in that final season.
Okay, so you pass your first couple tests, you make it to the top, you go over the cliff, and I'm telling you, my hands are sweating. And Johnny, who's in the studio with me, just showed me a picture of the top of El Cap and that cliff. Okay, and then you prepped for, was it 6 or 7 years before the actual climb? what did y'all do for 6 years? And then I also want to talk about how you map a climb that has so many little intricacies, like how it was all mapped and memorized. So what took place over the next 6 years leading up to the climb?
Really, the first season that Tommy and I climbed on it together, it was establishing exactly where the route was going to go. Right. So which crack systems are we going to dig our fingers into? Which faces are we going to have to like go across in order to link between these crack systems from bottom to top? And do we think this thing is actually possible? Period. Because if not, like, let's move on. Because you've been climbing long enough and you know if something's possible or not. But what was so special about the Dawn Wall is that it rode this line between possible and impossible for pitch after pitch after pitch, where we would look at it and be like, I don't know how, but I'm pretty sure this is possible. Like, I can't do the moves yet, but I think we with enough time, we could find out a way. So at the end of that first season, we knew where it was going to go, but we had no chance of actually doing it. I think we actually did go on a ground up, we call it a push. That's when we bring all of our stuff with us and we say, okay, we're not coming down until we either fail or a storm takes us out. And we really had nothing to lose toward the end of the season. So we went on a push, and this was in 2010. And we got totally shut down at the crux, and a storm came in and dropped, 6 feet of snow. But it was a great adventure. But it showed us like, okay, we're so far away from actually being able to do this. Tommy's mentality, and he's the most optimistic person you'll ever meet, by the way, was, oh, we'll just figure it out when we get there. We'll rise to the level that we need to when we get there. Even though we had never like successfully done the hardest pitches before. We learned quickly in 2010 on that push that was not going to be the case. So we actually didn't go on another push for quite a few years. The middle chunk of this period was spent just practicing all of the hardest sections until we could do them individually. Because big wall free climbing is not unlike the Tour de France. You can go train on those stages in the off season, but none of it matters unless you're putting it all together day after day, when the race starts, and the finish line doesn't matter unless you've started at the beginning and successfully done every stage up till then. So we needed to work on all of those pitches till either we had done them individually or, felt pretty confident that we could put it together on the final push. And that's what that middle chunk of years was dedicated to, just unlocking all of these puzzles, thousands of puzzles, tens of thousands of puzzles.
And so like in any one year, from January to December, were there certain times where you were actually on the wall and maybe other times where you were back at home, studying it differently from home? Or like, how'd the years go by and what were the chunks of time? Like, where were the chunks of time spent?
We used to start in early October, but what we quickly learned was that it was just too hot. It was just way too hot. And with, the weather patterns changing the way they were, like precip wasn't coming to Yosemite until later and later and later in the season. So normally we would, early on, we would start October 1st and climb until about Thanksgiving, maybe a little after Thanksgiving. I think in our final year, we started either in the middle or the end of October, and we climbed till the middle of January. So really, there's no such thing as too cold on El Cap because it's like the biggest solar conductor in the world. So long as the sun is on that wall, the air temperature could be 9 degrees Fahrenheit, which it was during the first week. And it was too cold to climb in the shade in that scenario, but it was perfect conditions in the sun. But then later on during the push, it kind of flipped and we could only climb during the shade. So, because friction is everything in rock climbing. So colder the better, because you don't sweat as much when it's cold. Hence the 3 or 4 months that we would focus mostly in the fall and winter of the year. And during the other parts of the year, we would, try to have fun with other forms of climbing and training just to get ready for the next season.
Yep. Okay. And then did y'all have this all written out? I mean, you said there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of moves. Was this all written down and then just kind of memorized? You had a quote in our pre-call, but you just said, finding that one little hole that is better for a pointer finger than a thumb. I mean, when I think about that and then I think about 3,000 feet, I'm just thinking like, it's almost overwhelming how many things you have to get memorized and comfortable with.
We may have written down a handful of sequences here or there, but basically the strength that I brought to the team was my bouldering background. And the difference between that background and Tommy's, I mean, Tommy has a bouldering background too, but the 10 years leading up to the Dawn Wall, he spent almost entirely on El Cap. So he was more comfortable in that environment than anybody in the world, which is like, can't ask for anything better in a partner. But what I brought was this bouldering background, which with bouldering, you approach your climbing like a surgeon. There's no detail too small, and you memorize every little nuance of the rock itself, of body position, of sequences. So I basically memorized all of the important sequences from bottom to top. Some of the pitches are so easy that that's not required. You can just use your intuition and figure it out. But for the hardest pitches, of which the first 20, like pretty much all of them are hard, you just gotta, through repetition, remember what to do, and all the way down to which little ripple of rock is for your left big toe at this point, or your right big toe at this point, and how you grab this and how you grab that. And yeah, that's the creativity and the beauty and the problem solving aspect that makes climbing so interesting, I think.
Did you and Tommy climb everything the exact same way, or were there times where you might do it differently than he did it?
I would say we shared sequences for about 95% of the climb. He's about an inch taller and with an inch longer ape index than I do. So there would be times when we grabbed the rock with our hands in the exact same sequence, but what we did with our feet looked different just because he was a little bit taller. It's amazing what 1 inch of difference can do. But the biggest difference, that 5%, was in the middle of the wall. There's this really dramatic 8-foot blank section that you have to jump across.
Pitch 15.
And this is actually right after pitch 15. This is pitch 16. And when I saw this in the first clip after Ambrosia, before I reached out to Tommy, it just looked like the most absurd thing. He's 1,500 feet off the ground doing a move that you would see on the boulders. You're just like, this exists on El Cap? Like, this looks absolutely insane. That move looks impossible. And early on, even that first season, we didn't know if that jump was possible. It was one of those things we had to figure out. Like, are we wasting our time? Or is this like, can we actually stick this move? So with my bouldering background, I was like, I'm all about it. Like, I want to tie in and try this thing. And I did end up sticking that jump on the first season in 2010. And I ended up doing pitch 16 using that method. But for whatever reason, Tommy just couldn't get that move to click consistently. I think he did it a handful of times over the years, but a handful of times over thousands of repetitions. It's just the odds are not that good when you're on the final push. So what he ended up pioneering was like this, we call it the loop pitch, where he actually like found a way to climb around it. And the movie does a good way of explaining this, but he found a really creative solution that got him to the same point that he needed to be at the top of pitch 16, but by making this huge roundabout, he did like 250 feet of climbing to avoid 8 feet of jumping across. But it worked. So I never even entertained trying the loop pitch. When he started working on it, I was like, F that. Like, no way. Like, I'm just going to take the one move wonder over, a 514 down climb. So, but I think it was really helpful that we had super similar sized bodies and styles, because we could share, in climbing, called the beta. It's like the sequence of where you put your hands and your feet.
Right. Okay. So then 6-7 years go by, you've done all the prep work, and at what point did you guys look at each other and you're like, okay, it's time. We need to now go do it. Was there a moment?
There was. So the season prior to the one that we did it, that was the year that Tommy did both pitch 14 and pitch 15 kind of individually. And those were the last two pitches that he hadn't done on the entire thing. So for him, he knew he was physically capable of climbing this route in its component pieces. Would he be able to sustain that effort on a push? Like, to be determined, but individually, he knew he could do all the individual pieces. So going into what became the last season, I know he had like, this is the year kind of mindset, right? Because he tasted it. I had a long way to go, really long way to go. Of the first 20 pitches, I still hadn't done 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Like, 8 of the hardest pitches. I hadn't put them together yet. So I was going to have to do that on the final push. I had done them in big sections or even overlapping sections, but I didn't have that same muscle memory and confidence that Tommy did going into it. But I knew that this season, because where Tommy left off the previous season, we were going for a push and he was shooting to do it. So that was kind of the mindset going into the last season was we're going to get prepped. We're going to work everything out. And then when we get our weather window, we're going to go for a push.
And at that point, had it been determined between the two of y'all that the goal was for both of y'all to complete the entire wall?
Yeah, that was our goal from the beginning, which is like the hardest form of big wall free climbing, called it team free, where both people are doing each pitch, just because, there's twice as many chances for failure to occur.
Yeah. So the total climb took 19 days. I want to talk about the intricacies of that, but let's just talk real quick about the prep. You had mentioned you packed 3,000 pounds of gear and food, and you literally lived on the side of the wall, hanging from the wall for 20 days. So can you just describe kind of that whole experience of living on the side of a wall and, sleeping thousands of feet above the ground and how everything was prepped to make this happen?
Absolutely. So, developing our logistical strategy, that is something that evolved over the years as well. Normally, the way you climb a big wall is that you climb a pitch, your partner climbs a pitch, and then you haul all your shit up behind you, and then you repeat that process 30 some odd times. But the process of hauling all that gear to stay alive on a wall for, we thought 12 days, ended up being 19. That becomes almost more physically exhausting than the rock climbing itself. So what we devised was almost like a mountaineering siege tactic, like very old school. There's lots of room for style improvements on our ascent. Tommy and I both recognize that, but it is the style that, we felt gave us the best odds of success, which was we're going to put a base camp in the middle of the wall. And that's going to be our spot. And we're going to stay in that base camp as long as possible. We only ended up spending one night outside of that base camp. So we climbed, day one, for example, we climbed the first 5 pitches. Then we hopped on those fixed ropes and commuted up with our ascenders up the ropes to our base camp, slept, came back down to where we left off at the top of pitch 5 and kept going. So sometimes we would be commuting up to our base camp, but as we got higher and higher on the wall, we would actually be commuting down to our base camp and then Jumaring back up to where we left off. And then 2 days before we topped out, we brought a small haul bag with 2 sleeping bags and some cooking stuff. We slept on a natural ledge about 300 feet below the summit. And then the following day, we topped out. So at that base camp, we had 3 portaledges. And a portaledge, if you look up a photo of it, it's just like a cot, essentially, that hangs suspended from the wall, about 6 feet wide by, 4 feet in depth. And it's just your little tent. It's got a weatherproof covering on it. You can open doors on either side. And when you zip it up at night, you wouldn't know that you weren't on the ground.
And are you locked in to where I roll around at night?
So at night, I don't recommend this practice, but just for comfort, we would, and the fact that we were like zipped inside a tent, so you literally couldn't roll off the edge of the portaledge, even if you tried. So we would just take a little piece of webbing and just kind of girth hitch it around our waist, and just have a super long leash so that we could take our harness off and just, be a little bit more comfortable. So we would use that system at night and then put our harness back on in the morning when we were shuffling around, digging stuff out of haul bags, cooking equipment and stuff like that. But yeah, that's basically the way we did it. And just, we pre-hauled everything with a lot of help, all that stuff to this one point, basically smack dab in the middle of the wall, so that everything was staged and ready to go. And we could, to the best of our ability, to just focus on the climbing, and like as little of the big wall toiling that usually goes with surviving on a wall up there. And that tactic ended up working out super well for us.
Yep. All right. I don't want to go through all the pitches, but for anybody that hasn't watched the Dawn Wall yet, you're going to watch it after this. But I want to talk about pitch 15 for a second.
Sure.
That was one where Tommy got through it, and you were, it took you a few days. So can you just walk me through why that was the one that kind of got you? And then what eventually, I know Tommy kept going, but he said, I'm not going any further until Kevin does this. Just that whole experience. It's such a great part of the documentary, and, true resilience.
Man, I'm so grateful for that experience. One thing I'll start by saying is that we went into this like knowing it was going to be hard, right? That's kind of like why we do it. We knew that this was going to be the biggest challenge we have faced as climbers. It's our Super Bowl. Normally in elite rock climbing, whether or not you succeed on any given day is pretty trivial, because you just come back the next day, right? Or you just come back the next season. You don't do the boulder, who cares? Come back another time. The headline will just come out some other time. But with big wall free climbing, it introduces this element of consequence around the timing, because you can't stay up there forever. And you've prepped your entire season, your entire year around being on this wall at this time in the perfect weather window with your fitness peaking, and you've got all your supplies up there. So all of a sudden, it starts to matter a lot more whether or not you succeed on any given day. And it introduces this element of pressure that you don't normally feel when you have a sport climbing project or you have a bouldering project. Sure, you're disappointed when you don't do those, but it really doesn't matter if you do it on Saturday or you do it on Monday. But the clock's ticking when you're on a big wall. So the first week went almost too well. Every day we had a menu of pitches, that we had to go consume. Day 1 was 1 through 5. Day 2, we did 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we took a rest day in a windstorm. The 4th climbing day was pitch 10. The next day was pitch 11, and so on and so forth. By the 7th day, we were at the meat of the route. The day prior, we had actually done pitch 14, which is technically harder than pitch 15. But these two stretches of rock are just like trying to climb from right to left across 400 feet of porcelain. There are no cracks to grab. It's just like take a concrete road and just tilt it dead vertical, and that's what you have to go across. It's just like blank. And what makes it so hard is that the crack system that we had been following, however faint, petered out. And then 400 feet to the left, a different one opened up, and we had to get over there, So we're just these two pitches of porcelain that you have to go across. We spent probably the majority of our days of prep throughout the years on those two pitches, because they were just so far over our head. So we were riding high, because on day 6, we had done pitch 14, both of us, within a handful of tries. I think we even had a leisurely dinner before like 9 o'clock, which was unheard of. It was not uncommon as it soon began to unfold to climb till 11 or 12 at night. And the reason is we don't start climbing until the shade hits at 4 p.m. So Tommy gets across pitch 15. And on my first night of attempts, I gave it 4 attempts. I didn't do it. One of the things that made this pitch particularly hard is just how sharp it is. Like, it's just so, the holds you're hanging on to are just so small, so sharp. And on the second day, I think I mentioned earlier, the first week we were on the wall, it was like 9 degrees Fahrenheit the entire time. It was just really, really cold. And when it's that cold, the calluses on your fingers get really brittle. And when you're grabbing really sharp pieces of rock, it makes it very easy for you to rip holes in your calluses, which is what happened on my right index finger. I got a deep, deep rip in my finger. So with all the pitches leading up to pitch 14 and including pitch 14, I was able to do those with that finger taped up. But because the climate was so rough, that cut didn't heal, and I still was climbing with tape on, and I just couldn't get the friction I needed on pitch 15 with that finger all taped up. So that was one of the main things that really held me back early on, was just these cuts that I had in my index and my middle finger. So I climbed with it taped on day 7, didn't do it. Gave it a couple tries on day 8, didn't do it. Decided to take a rest day. And so on went the dance. I forget the exact sequence at this point of like how many rest days and in what order. But at one point, I ended up taking 2 consecutive rest days for the purpose of just letting those cuts heal. I just felt like I didn't really have a chance with those fingers taped up. I needed at least one of those cuts to heal up. And at this point, the pressure is mounting, right? We packed for 12 days. I've been stuck now for 5 days. I'm resting on day 5. I'm resting on day 6 of this kind of battle with pitch 15. And I really felt like day 7 had to be it, because if I couldn't do it on 2 days rest with good skin, like what else do I need? And the other part is, we've been up here a really long time. It's January. A storm could come in at any time. I don't want to hold Tommy back, although I know he wants to do this together. And I felt like it had to be the day. And I don't know that that's true, but what the more important thing is that it put me in the mindset that I needed to be in to perform. Sometimes you have to be in a position to fail to discover what you're capable of. And by telling myself that if I don't do it today, that's it, it gave me one outcome, which was to succeed. Because as I sat in that portal edge for those, days, some of the longest nights of my life, just sweating it out, like, am I going to do this, or am I going to be the guy that almost climbed the dawn wall for the rest of my life? It was that outcome, the idea of living with that memory of almost, that was more motivating than any form of imagining what the celebration on top might be. Or the satisfaction of success. It was much more of living with the failure that, at least for my mindset, I just couldn't live with that, So, and having gone through so many disappointments of failure on that pitch, that you can only ride that roller coaster so many times before your confidence doesn't fully recover. You can show up, you can put on the face, but unless you're confident, like truly confident that you're going to do it this try, it's very hard to be in the right mindset. And I didn't know how many more of those roller coasters I could endure. How many beatdowns can you take of giving it 4 tries, climbing till 12 at night, 1 in the morning, not doing it, having to take more rest days, holding up the team. Like, it just felt like so much pressure. And at this point, there was a whole media circus around the climb that just happened on its own. It was totally insane. So like the whole world was watching as well, which was like not helpful. But I'll never forget waking up on January 9th, 2015, and it was overcast, which it hadn't been the entire time we were up there, which meant I got to climb in the day. Most of my attempts over the past week were at night. And I remember tying in and chalking up and just feeling like I was right where I wanted to be. Sometimes you're showing up for a test that you're dreading because you're not prepared and you don't want to take it. And other times you walk in and you're like, give it to me. I'm ready. And standing on the edge of that portal edge, I just felt like I was right where I wanted to be. And that flow state that I didn't find on Ambrosia, I just dropped into effortlessly. And as I climbed from right to left, like my mind turned off and I just executed and kind of snapped out of it as I was getting to the anchors and couldn't really believe it. I'm so glad there was a camera there to capture it, because so much of it is a blur. That part of my brain was not there to make a memory out of what I was going through and what I was doing. Yeah, just by going into it knowing that it was going to be hard, we didn't know what form the hardship was going to take or in what degree or caliber it was going to arrive. But when it did, it made it so much easier to be like, all right, game on. Like, this is what I signed up for. Like, of course it's going to be hard. That first week went so well. We just did everything you're supposed to do each day, that when the setbacks started to come, we were able to just kind of bear hug that shit and be like, all right, let's go. This is what we're here for. We know it's supposed to be hard.
Oh, dude, I love it. One more question on pitch 15. Was it a certain spot in the route that was causing you fits that you were
same spot every time?
Okay.
Same sequence every time. So, what the breakthrough was, and I don't tell this story very often, but it's kind of counterintuitive. You'd think that like a gymnast might visualize their final routine, in order to instill confidence. I was doing quite the opposite. I actually asked the film crew, all of our best friends up there filming, we'd climbed with and worked with for our entire careers. I asked them to edit together every failed attempt up to that point and send me a password protected Vimeo link. So on my 2 rest days prior to doing it, I was watching that video over and over again, trying to figure out what was going wrong, because I was getting the same outcome. And it's not like I knew this sequence didn't work, because it had worked successfully in the past, which is why I was using it. But I felt that, okay, I know this works and I could probably do it that way, but I've fallen 10 times in the exact same spot now. My body almost expects to fall at that point, because it's going through the same physical routine over and over again, and then it ends up hanging on the rope every single time. So what I decided to do was change up. I had basically a backup sequence, and I didn't change anything about my hands. It was all about my feet. I changed the way I arranged my feet through that crux sequence. So the morning before I did it, I went up there with my climbing shoes, went straight over to the crux and just played with that foot sequence. And I was like, okay, I'm going to switch. It's like bottom of the ninth, but I'm going to totally change my approach on this for 2 reasons. One, I felt like my body needed to kind of be shook like a snow globe, as far as its expectation of what it was about to go through. And 2, while it was more moves in total, I felt like it did actually give me a better chance of success. So, and I do think that made all the difference. Getting to that sequence, all of a sudden, it felt like I was doing something totally new. It wasn't something like, oh, this is where you tip over backwards. This is where this foot slips off. It was being asked to do something that it wasn't used to. So it was able to just show up in a new way. And that, I think, was a big piece of the puzzle. And I'm so glad that I had the wherewithal to question the method of success that I assumed at the beginning was going to be the way, and was open to it looking a different way, and that's a lesson that I've learned before in my climbing, and I had to relearn and apply while I was up there, and I relearn it and apply it in my life to this day and going forward as well.
Yep. All right. Last question on the Dawn Wall, and then we'll move into a few other things you're working on. But you mentioned, and I know this was a part of the documentary, all of a sudden the media caught on to it. And it was, if you watch the documentary, it's on every news station in the world and people are starting to gather at the bottom. How did you know that the whole world was now watching you? Did somebody tell you that, or did they try not to tell you? And did that screw with your psyche at all?
It was a conversation we had to have together on the wall. So what happened was, John Branch from the New York Times, he's a really talented sports writer, but he doesn't just write about team sports. He writes amazingly for the paper, but he also writes these books about different oddball characters in sports that you'd never think to stop and pause and inquire about, who's behind this person, whether that's a rodeo cowboy or a couple rock climbers on a wall, or a hockey player, or this snowboarding athlete. And he shines light on, in just such a great way, these seemingly obscure sports and the people behind them. So he was really well suited to do this story justice, which so many news stations didn't. But John Branch reached out. He asked for an interview. We were on the wall. Like, I have a screenshot of it, actually. It's like, John Branch, speaking of Twitter changing your life, like I got a little notification, like, New York Times Sports is now following you. Followed immediately, like, you have a message from John Branch. And he's like, hi, it's John Branch from New York Times. Like, would you guys be down to talk on the phone? And it was like pretty novel for us, right? It happened to be a rest day. We're like, holy shit, like New York Times wants to write about rock climbing? Like, this is crazy. Like, sure, we've got 12 hours tomorrow. We're not doing anything. Like, we might as well give this guy a call, like, not thinking anything of it, right? So we do it. And he writes the story, and he told me that, it wasn't like just any other story. He thought it was cool, but he didn't have any sense that it was going to get any kind of mainstream attention. But as soon as they uploaded it to the website, it just got a ton of traffic. Like, clearly it hit some kind of vein that no one predicted, and it just shot to the top of the most read list, but then it stayed there. So that's when he did a follow-up story. And at that point, then we got a call from, I think, Terry Gross at NPR wanting to do an interview. And we're like, oh boy, this is getting crazy. So at this point, we're like, and the incoming media requests just snowballed out of control, like overnight. Like every news station somehow got our email and was asking for interviews. So we kind of huddled up because we saw where this was going. It was going to be a distraction. And we just said, okay, outgoing only. We had been posting to social media for years, just sharing our process and our story, and our climbing community really seemed to enjoy following along. So we did it as much for them as for ourselves. So we were doing that this season, but then overnight you get, another 10 or 20 or 30,000 followers when you didn't have any the night before. And you're like, what is going on? Like, this is crazy. So we decided, we'll post one, picture a day. We will forward all emails to somebody else, and it's just outgoing only, one channel only, which was our Instagram accounts, which is basically to say we're going to keep doing what we've been doing and nothing extra. So we took the NPR call and we shut down every other request. No phone calls, no emails, nothing. Like, we continued doing what we had been doing with the Instagram stuff, but that was pretty much it. But there's usually nobody in Yosemite in the middle of January. It's so cold down there. It's way nicer up in El Cap, it turns out, than it is on the valley floor. Like, there were days it was 60, 70 degrees up there. And then down on the valley floor, it's probably 10 degrees. So, but when you look down there and there's news trucks, and there's 100 people in the meadow freezing their, butts off in the middle of the winter, it's just an odd sight to see. So, all that stuff kind of snowballed, and was like, wow, this is something else. And John kept writing about it, and soon enough it just seemed to be everywhere. I think someone calculated it got like billions of media impressions or something like that at the end of the day. Just like, I don't know, media has it's its own machine, and when a story gets tapped into that machine, it goes everywhere. And our story just happened to go everywhere. And that was not anything we asked for or planned for, but, it changed our lives in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. So I'll skip the next X amount of pitches, and to anybody that hasn't watched it, don't mean to spoil it, but they actually make it all to the top. And so a Twitter guy asked, after such a remarkable achievement and the resulting high, was there a point where y'all crashed?
I wouldn't call it a crash, but the what's next question, which we got tens of thousands of times, is basically the only question anybody asked us in interviews after the climb. But how do you answer that question after something like that? I think it's impossible. And it actually, we kind of, Tommy and I both just stopped trying to answer it, because there's this, I've commented in the past, like whether we're talking about, sports achievements or business achievements, we're really quick to, celebrate the headline and then immediately just look to the future. Like, well, how are you going to one up that? How are you going to one up that? And that approach to life just, it accepts that that's the equation that you have to live your life by. That everything has to be bigger, everything has to be better, everything you've never arrived or this or that. And like, we got into this project with a very distant goal in mind, one that we never knew whether or not we would achieve. And really it was, can we become the climbers that we need to be to do this? And if not, like, we're still going to be a lot better, partners and climbers than we were when we started, and that'll be worth it. It wasn't, let's do the hardest big wall free climb in the world or whatever, and make a big media spectacle out of it. So just the way that it all came out, I think, implied a lot of our motivations about why we do what we do, that without digging into why we do what we do, or like, what about those 6 years you guys spent preparing for this thing? Why did you do that? Toiling away in anonymity, just in the small climbing community. People couldn't really wrap their heads around that. So, I look at my relationship with climbing and even life as one that unfolds in chapters, and I'm just adding chapters ever so carefully as time goes on. And the Dawn Wall was a chapter of big wall free climbing, and I'm not going to top that. I think Tommy and I both accepted that this project is special. It's what captured our passion and attention and held it with, laser focus for that many years. You don't come across that kind of opportunity or that kind of objective or that kind of relationship with a thing very often in life, if at all, So to try to incrementally, like, just find something harder, I don't know. I kind of just want to appreciate the Dawn Wall for the Dawn Wall and be open to, just like I was after Ambrosia, like a next chapter of my climbing that maybe looks different than the one that I was just in. And right now that looks like expedition style climbing to more remote areas. For a couple of years after the Dawn Wall, I didn't want to do some groundbreaking hardcore shit. I'm an introvert by nature. Like, I'm not like the most comfortable in this like public figure type role. It's definitely not what we were aiming to achieve by climbing rocks. So kind of receding out of the limelight deliberately just to like reclaim my own relationship with climbing, absent any expectations from the public, and just like, yeah, I'm going to work on a project to, free climb this thing over here or this thing over here in the valley that's nowhere near as hard as the Dawn Wall, but I care about it for my own reasons. This is an old Tom Frost classic. I talked to Tom down in the meadow. He told me the story of the first ascent. It's never been freed. Like, I love taking old lines that were aid climbed in the 50s and 60s and bringing them into a modern era. And I do these things and nobody cares. And that's fine. Like, just like Alex, no matter what he free solos after El Cap, like, no, they're not going to make an Oscar winning documentary about it. We talked about this around the campfire on the top of El Cap. He's like, God, it's kind of frustrating. Like, it doesn't matter what I do after this. Like, there is no topping that in some way. So the Dawn Wall was a reinvention. I think what I embraced is, reinventions in other aspects of my life, getting married, becoming a parent, starting a business, and then at the same time maintaining a healthy passion for and with my climbing, but without the same, like, I have to go do something harder than a Dawn Wall. And yeah, not forcing it. So now, the fire is for these big remote granite big walls out in Baffin Island and Greenland and things like that. And I'm excited to pursue that. But will it hit the zeitgeist and go global mainstream? Like, no. And that's okay, because that's not why we were doing it from the beginning.
Yeah, in one way you were given, I mean, you've accomplished something that is so incredibly, it's mind-blowing. And it's kind of interesting that happened to you at a relatively early age, and the way you're thinking about it is like not everything has to surmount to the dawn wall to live a successful life. And I think, especially in America, we live in a culture where it's like you said, it's what's next, bigger, better, stronger, faster.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really cool outlook on things.
I remember getting, Tommy and I had to learn how to become public speakers basically overnight after that climb, and that, if you've ever done any public speaking, like it's hard, right? And it takes a lot of practice to get good at that stuff. But I remember being at some speaking gig, I think I was in Rome or something like that. And this guy sitting across the table, I don't even know what the event was at this point, but he was like, well, are you going to go back and do it again? And I just remember like staring at him like, what? Why would I do that? He's like, oh, just to prove that it's not a fluke. And I'm like, still a blank stare. And I'm just like, no, man, like, I don't need that validation. That's not how I live my life. But there's so much pressure to live it that way, right? Especially when, you're in a profession like being an athlete and things are about scores and points on the board and, headlines and this and that. Like it's, there's a lot of pressure to do that, but finding a way to strike a healthy balance with, expectation and ambition and passion and career. It's a lot to manage.
Yep. All right. We've, let's spend just some time, and then you've been gracious with your time, but I do want to spend a little time on what's next and something I can relate a little more to. You are developing, a rock climbing gym, and you're learning about the joys of development. And you've also created a very, impactful nonprofit and have started a family. So let's just talk about kind of that part of your life. And then, I'll ask you some fun personal questions and we'll call it a day.
All right. Sounds good. After the Dawn Wall, I married my longtime girlfriend, Jackie. And a couple of years later, we have our son, Edsel, named after my grandpa. He's 2.5 now. He's just a fireball. He's so much fun. He's just like totally conversational now. And he's got so much energy. It's just a kick. Luckily, he's napping right now. So, I got my start in a climbing gym, and having traveled the world to these amazing climbing gyms, I always was a little bit jealous of the quality of these things compared to what my community had access to back home an hour north of San Francisco in Sonoma County. So around late 2015, early 2016, I kind of made up my mind, like, you know what, screw it. Like, I'm going to build one of these things. Like, it can't be that hard, right? Like,
I climbed the Dawn Wall.
God. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, shows you what I knew. But it's so appropriate that the punchline I remember using back then was, well, I know this is going to take a long time, but as long as it doesn't take as long as the Dawn Wall, I'll be happy. Well, we are 6 months into construction, and it looks like our grand opening will be exactly 6 years after when I started working on this, which will be pretty much exactly like the Dawn Wall. So karma has its way of serving its justice for hubris. But yeah, I mean, the joys of development. I knew that I wanted to build something from scratch. Climbing gyms often convert old buildings with various degrees of success, but I wanted something brand new, clean, modern, like really nice HVAC system, keep the air clear, keep it warm, keep it cool. I just wanted to design every square inch of it. And that meant finding a piece of land and finding it. And I had no roadmap for this. Now I understand that it's like a very clear checklist. Like this has been happening for decades and hundreds of years. Like there's a very clear way to go develop a piece of it. But I had no idea what I was doing, right? Like this is like showing up on day one on the Dawn Wall. It was just like I was totally out of my league. But I love that stuff. And I, in many ways, was as passionate about this objective as I was for Ambrosia or for the Dawn Wall. And the only outcome that I was going to accept was getting it done. And I didn't know, like the Dawn Wall, to what degree or in what shape that hardship was going to show up. But I knew it was going to come. But it certainly has arrived and has been a lot more challenging I was expecting, for sure.
And is it a new take on climbing, or is it just your way of developing it? And is the goal to build one, or is it to build multiple?
So it's not so much a new concept, really. It's just, what climbing facilities have done. Climbing facilities are basically where fitness was 30 years ago, which is like everything under one roof. You've got multiple disciplines. You've got the bouldering, you've got the ropes, you've got adult stuff, you've got kids stuff, you've got yoga, you've got regular weightlifting, you've got fitness classes. And it's like a health club centered around climbing, as opposed to a health club that throws a climbing wall in the corner. Like climbing is like the core activity, but you're surrounding it with amenities that help make it more appealing to that traditional health club member who wants the sauna, wants the nice, clean surfaces, and they don't want it to smell like rental shoes. They want a nice facility. So really, when I was raising money, I kept saying, like, this isn't new. It's just new for Sonoma County. We've seen 500 copies of how this works in various markets all across the country. Like, it's going to work here.
And what's the name of it? And if anybody's listening that wants to look it up or get on a wait list for when it's opening, where is it and what's its name going to be?
So our North Star around why we wanted to build this was creating a space where community can grow. It's like building something that has gravitational pull to it. So often I feel like climbing gyms take credit for building community. And I think that is a stretch. I think what climbing gyms do, and a lot of various gathering spaces do, is they create the opportunity for these collisions to happen between people, for community to evolve and grow. And I love my climbing community here in Sonoma County. In many ways, it raised me through my teenage years, and I wanted to create a place where everyone felt that when they came here, it was time well spent. When someone is carving out time to come to your place, I think that says a lot. Forget what they're paying every month for the pleasure. It's when they're saying no to a date, no to dinner with family, because they value how they spend their time in your facility. That means a lot. So we named it, to your question, Session, after this idea of like this North Star of time well spent, of carving out time for what matters most for you during the week and enjoying that. And if we're getting it wrong, that notion of time well spent, we want to hear about it. We want to hear about it from our members. We want to hear about it from our staff, because I feel like if we get that right, we'll be successful. And if we're getting it wrong, we'll know why. We'll be able to diagnose it. But if we're not paying attention to the quality of experience that people are having in a facility like this, then you're not going to succeed. So we named it Session, and you can follow us on social media or find our website at just sessionclimbing.com. It's singular, not plural. People often mistake that. But yeah, so we called it Session, and I wish I could say that it's felt like time well spent over the past 6 years of real estate development. But I've loved the learning process. I will tell you that, from figuring out even what a developer is, to negotiating a built-to-suit lease with that person who has now become a friend and an investor in our business, and going through the architecture phase and the entitlements, and now in construction and design. It's just such a creative and collaborative process where the problem solving just never stops. And I love that about it. But to your other question, I do want to do a few more up here in the North Bay, but I don't think I want to do a ground up development again. I think I've got a little too much scar tissue that needs to heal before I'm ready for that kind of project again. But I could see us doing, something that focused just on bouldering. That's a pretty common way to develop a climbing gym as well, is forget the ropes, just do it for the bouldering only. And those are a lot easier to operate. They're a lot cheaper to build. You can punch them out relatively quickly compared to development. And then I really want to do something that's just like kid and family focused as well, that kind of fits into that family entertainment type business, but does it in a way where a kid walks into it and it looks like a vertical playground for them to interact with. So we're playing with that idea as well.
I love it, man. Well, development's not for the faint of heart, and I have a huge heart for developers because it's at its core, it's managing a lot of different vendors, doing a lot of different things, city governments, and trying to get it all wrapped together for a final product. So,
yeah,
we've
it's you've done a fair bit of it, but have smartly focused to just acquire as opposed to build.
Yes, we've moved to just acquiring, not building. There's a lot of risks that you can't control in development.
Yes.
It takes a lot of patience.
For sure.
All right, last thing, and then a couple personal ones, but just give me a little bit of update of what's going on with your nonprofit. When we talked about it on our pre-call, it was a really cool thing that you're doing, and I want people to know about it.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for circling back to that. This really is related to why I wanted to do a gym to begin with, which was I really just wanted to build the opportunities that I wish I had when I was younger. And I loved the gym that I started climbing in, but it's nothing. Gyms have changed so much in the last 20 years. So I was thinking about, 11-year-old me walking into a climbing gym for the first time. What does that look like? What do I want that to look like for the kid who's just getting into it? And that's kind of why I'm going through the pain of doing a ground up thing. Is I just want I want it to inspire. I want it to, on some levels, intimidate, in a healthy way, and just bring the best out of people. And the same goes for a nonprofit. Like, what opportunities do I want to create that I wish I had? I was lucky in that I lived in a neighborhood close to a climbing gym, so I became aware of it. My parents could afford it. And, without those two things, the proximity and the means, there's no way I would have ever gotten into the sport. I would have been a monkey and still climbing on things, but it's a far cry from like getting into an actual sport. So cost and proximity barrier became a focus for me back in 2010. So I've been on this for 11 years now. And I was like, what would it take to introduce 1 million kids to climbing? Because I don't think it happens with just commercial climbing gyms, at least not very fast. So I was like, what would that even take? And what I stumbled on was, okay, well, if I need to break down the cost barrier and the proximity barrier, why don't I put this thing where kids already are, as opposed to trying to build something that they will come to, because that has its own cost and proximity challenges. So, where do kids spend their time after school? The Boys and Girls Club of America serves 4.5 million kids a year, and they have 4,000 locations. Seemed like a pretty good starting point for building access to sport. So what One Climb does is we do just that. We design, build, install climbing walls in Boys and Girls Clubs around the country, and we create durable, long-lasting programs by partnering those Boys and Girls Club walls with the commercial climbing gym that's in town. And we only build these when those two units are relatively close to one another. Because what we want the climbing gym to feel like is that it's their sister facility. We really want them to bring it into the fold and own it and take care of it and nourish it. Because the walls that we build for these kids, I don't want them to be too intimidating. They're 20 feet tall, 25 at the most. They have auto belays on them, which means it's super easy for the staff to clip the kids in and out. And pretty much, most kids can find success on a wall like that. But if they really take a liking to it, they have the pathway to go to the commercial climbing gym for free and get the instruction and get the access and get the mentorship that they need to keep learning and keep enjoying the sport. So let's see, we've built, I think, 12 of them so far, with 3 more going in. We've got 2 more going into Brooklyn and the Bronx this summer. And we've got 1 more, I haven't announced it yet, but I think we're going to put it into West Oakland, our first Bay Area location. But we have them all over the country. And I just love the mission so much. It means so much to me. This is something that it doesn't have a finish line to it. Like, I can see myself working on this, and I will be for the next, 20, 30 years. You could literally build one of these in almost every city in the country if you had the money for it.
Yep. That is so cool. Any idea how many kids you've impacted to date on your way to 1 million?
Oh man, I don't. I mean, we've been trying to keep track, and I know we have a rough number. It's got to be in the tens of thousands now, because each club will have anywhere from, a couple hundred to 1,000 members that will create access for the opportunity for them to try it if they want to. We built one in Denver where it's actually part of a larger network where 10,000 kids will have the opportunity to experience that wall if they want to. So yeah, I'm just going to keep chucking along and keep building those things, because climbing changes lives, and it gives you whatever you need in life. Climbing is like a mirror, and it gives you the opportunity to find it. If it's confidence that you seek, climbing gives you the opportunity to build it. If it's focus that you need, climbing will demand it of you. And there are so many innate qualities to the activity that are good for kids and adults that simply by making it available does so much, let alone the programming that you can put on top of it.
That is so cool. And you've obviously been blessed with an awesome platform to be able to help a lot of people. And yeah, I think that's awesome. And not to make it about me, but I told you I had climbed my first rock last week. And it was the first time I've ever rock climbed in my life. And I've been telling people about it all week. It was absolutely incredible experience for someone that honestly, I was, kind of skeptical going into it. So I can imagine what it's like. I can imagine what it's like for a young kid that's full of energy and time to keep practicing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have to, I'm glad you got to rope up with Kevin out there in Boulder. We'll have to make another road trip, get it on the calendar, maybe further west this time, and get you up on a wall in Yosemite, perhaps.
I'm going to climb with you one day. Deal?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
All right. 3 questions and then I'll let you go. You've been super generous. And maybe you've already answered it, but do you have a childhood experience? Maybe it was like a one-time event, or just maybe the way your parents raised you that kind of shaped who you are today?
That's a great question. I don't know if it's so much a particular experience, but just a method of parenting that I think they adopted, which was they gave me a long leash as a kid. They really, I don't think I was like hyper rambunctious to the point where like they didn't have any control over it or any choice in the matter. But I think it was actually quite deliberate in that I didn't feel like I had really narrow bumper lanes on the risks I could take as a kid or the interests that I could express. And it allowed me to, learn through living. broke a lot of bones, in the hospital a bunch. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. And it allowed me to find my passions. And I can't thank them enough for that. I think it's important to have some bumper lanes around, especially risk when it comes to raising a little one. And that's probably the hardest part of parenting, is knowing where to draw that line, but also letting him, explore his natural world. And I think growing up, spending so much time in the natural world, in the beginning, it was a lot of whitewater rafting and camping, and then much later became climbing. But just most of my childhood memories are around the campfire and in the tent and on the river and out hiking or out hunting or waking up at dawn and doing this or that, and having a connection and a reverence for the natural world is probably the gift I appreciate most from my childhood.
I love it. All right. Do you have a morning routine or something that kind of starts your day? You've been very vocal about loving the process of lots of things. Do you have a process for how you awake each day?
It ebbs and flows, honestly. And this is something that I need to probably get back on, especially now that I actually just sustained a really nasty finger injury. So I'm not allowed to climb for 3 months. So I gotta get some new routines for my time that I would usually spend climbing. But for a couple of months there, I had a routine that I love that I want to get back into, which was morning yoga. I've been doing the same sport for so long that my body's pretty been beat up in the same exact way for so many years that, it's hard to touch my toes, but I can put my foot above my ear if I need to in a certain move, So like I'm flexible in all the ways that I need to be for climbing, but like extremely imbalanced in a lot of other ways. And I also just really enjoy kind of that slow start to the morning and the consistency that it brings. But anyone that knows me knows that the real answer to this is coffee. That's probably the ritual I stick to the most is my French press of coffee. But other than that, yoga is probably the one that I enjoyed the most recently and we'll be getting back to.
All right. The final question. If you were giving somebody that's just maybe thinking about climbing, or maybe they've done a few and they're starting to get interest, but you had to give some advice to somebody that's, getting into this, what advice would you give for a beginner climber? And I'm asking for myself.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that it just has to be fun. There's such a push. We were talking about this topic earlier around progress and achievement and things like that. And it's so easy to make that the objective with anything that you do. And what's beautiful about climbing is that there is no scoreboard. There are no points. Success is how you define it. And that's what makes it so accessible to so many people. So if that allows you to define your relationship with it in a broad number of ways that maybe you can't with a basketball game that has a winner and loser at the end of every single one, so to keep it fun is just so important. And maybe that comes to top of mind for me because I've had to balance passion and career with it for so long. But I think it applies to our society's obsession with, excellence and achievement as well. Like that, those don't always go hand in hand with fun either. And climbing is supposed to be fun. It's childlike. We've been doing it for eons. It's a natural way of movement, and it brings so many benefits to your physical and mental health that if you're losing sight of why we're doing it to begin with, it's because we enjoy it. Like, what a shame. So yeah, keep it fun. Just keep it fun. If you don't like climbing on a rope, don't climb on a rope. Go bouldering. Like you don't have to, make it something that it's not for yourself. It's just rock climbing. It's supposed to be fun. Keep it that way.
All right. I'm going to take that because I'm going to go to a climbing gym in Fort Worth here.
You've got some nice ones to pick from too.
Yeah, no, we do. There's one not too far from my house that I have my eye on. So, all right. Well, Kevin,
I want to see some pictures.
I will send you pictures. And Kevin, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I had hands sweating for half of it. They've dried up now. But this was great, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise. That was fun.
Hey everyone, it's Chris here again. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star rating, or write a quick review. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Chris Powers is the founder and CEO of Fort Capital LP. All opinions from Chris and guests of the Fort Podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Fort Capital LP. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for real estate or investment decisions. The Fort with Chris Powers is produced by Straight Up Podcasts.